Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for today's Developers versus Designers Tech session. My name is Stu Pringle, and I'm your host for today's session. And I'm joined by Nick Howard from Empire Engineering. And we've got two very special invited guests along for today's debate as well. I'm going to welcome along Carl Winkle from Ramble and Eric Degand from Parkwind. Where this gets interesting is that Nick is in fact ex-Ramble and he's currently seconded into Parkwind. So we'll get a little bit more of that later. So before we start the session properly, just a few points. Empire Engineering, if you don't know us, we are an engineering consultancy that supports the offshore wind industry with advice, insight, and technical know-how. The headquarters is in Bristol in the UK. We have a London office, and as a team, we can be deployed all around the world. So that's a little bit about Empire. Okay. For those of you who have not done a crowdcast before, here's just a little bit of housekeeping. And this is actually the fourth one in the series. They've been very, very popular so far. So thank you very much for coming along today. You'll see on the right-hand side, there's a little chat stream. So please come and say hello. Tell us who you are, where you're from. I can see good evening from Singapore there from Jerry. So good evening, Jerry. We'll also be sharing our screens during the sessions. You don't have to do anything at all. You can just sit and enjoy the chat. If you do have a question, you'll see at the bottom, you can submit, ask a question, and we will pick them up as we go through the session. So please do get involved. We'll also be doing a couple of Ask the Audience polls as well to get your views on the hot topic today. Okay. I'm going to introduce the speakers and the topic in just a moment, but before I do, I'd like to say a very brief thank you to our sponsors, without whom this whole series wouldn't be possible, and they are ITH Bolting Technology and Wood Thilstead, so thank you to them both. So, today's session, we're going to be talking about designers versus developers, featuring Nick, Carl, and Eric. In terms of an agenda, at a very high level, we're going to meet the speakers shortly. We're going to talk a little bit about innovation, and we're going to talk about the balance between CapEx and OpEx. We're going to talk about feedback, and hopefully we can get some conclusions about how we can perhaps work better together and some final thoughts. It's probably about time that we met today's speakers. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Carl Winkle. Hello, Carl. Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning. And I've got Eric as well. Good morning, Eric.
Hi, Stu.
Hello. And last but not least, Nick from Empire. Good morning, Nick.
Hello. Good morning.
Excellent. So these are today's speakers. But I think it's probably good to know a little bit about our audience as well. So before we dive into what I suspect will be a very interesting debate, why don't we find out from our audience if we have a room full of developers or designers, or in fact, if you're just here to enjoy the ride. So if you look at the bottom of the screen, everyone in the audience, you'll see that there's just popped up polls and a red number 1. If you click on polls, you'll see the question there, and you can decide whether you want to answer as if you are a developer, a designer, or if you're just here to enjoy the ride. Let's find out if the audience is full of developers, full of designers, or a bit of both. So I can see that at the moment, there's lots of votes coming in, and we've had about 20 people, 30 people reply so far. So I'll just let it run for a little bit longer, and I'll give you the answers. So here we go. So everyone who's here in the audience, if you click polls at the bottom, let us know if you are a developer, if you are a designer, or if you're just here to enjoy the ride. Okay, so it's a pretty even split so far. So it looks like we've got 9 or 10 developers in the room. We've got 15 designers so far. And we've got another 14, 15 people who are just here to see what's going on. The votes are still coming in, but look, there's a nice even split. Slightly more designers than developers. Okay. So that's good to know. Developers, you're outnumbered, so you're going to have to fight your corner during this morning's session. Okay. I think now we know who we are, I think I'll hand over to Nick to sort of set the scene, because he's the man who's been on both sides of the fence. So Nick, why don't we start with you? Set the scene. Tell us what's going on here.
Sure. So the idea for this webinar is kind of based on my career history, I guess. So for a number of years, I started my career working as a designer at Ramble, so alongside Carl. And then I moved to Empire Engineering, where as part of that, I was seconded into Parkwind, where I've been working with Eric. Eric, almost 3 years to the day, not far off. So been colleagues for a while. And I found that transition from kind of designer to developer really interesting. And it's kind of quite a privilege, I guess, almost to sit on both sides of the desk, as it were, and see kind of the interplay between the two parties. And I think it's sometimes it kind of feels, during a detailed design project, especially, sometimes it's a harmonious dance with both parties, working in cohesion and things going well. And then at other times, sometimes it's more like a chess game where the two parties have maybe secret intention. Maybe that's a bit cruel, not secret intentions, but things aren't quite as harmonious as they could be. And I think it's a relationship worth exploring, as it kind of impacts on everything we do kind of within the industry. And I think what I want to discuss is kind of the alignment of the goals between the two parties. So I think on paper, the parties come together to design a wind farm. That's kind of the big goal. But obviously, at the end of the day, they're both businesses, and kind of the KPIs they're being judged on is their financial metrics. It's not how many wind farms have you built. So I think it's it's worth exploring as a relationship, and the interplay of these two parties, and how the goals align, and how they diverge slightly, and how that impacts the working relationship.
Very interesting. Thanks, Nick. I think I might bring Carl into the discussion at this point.
I mean, I think at a high level, Nick's saying, we are all trying to progress to the same endpoint, I guess. So I guess at a high level, we are all aligned in the goal. I mean, even you just wanted to take a very business point of view. I mean, a successful wind farm for a developer is the same for a designer. Effectively, we're only as good as our last project, is a saying you often hear. But I think that perhaps there is at times some difference just due to kind of what the goals are. I mean, the designer effectively is. I mean, it depends on who the developer is, but in some instances, a designer is only in the length, the product life cycle for the designer is much shorter than, say, for Parkwing, for example. As a developer, they're looking at a much longer project time frame than the designer is. And so in some instances, I guess goals will start to potentially diverge. I think at the start of the project, they're probably much more aligned, but coming close to the end, I guess the developer is starting to look further ahead in the project life cycle than the designer is, where the designer might be moving on to a new project.
I think you've hit on something there, Carl, in terms of the kind of the timeline of a project and the designer's involvement. I mean, my impression of working at Parkwind is kind of how important the timeline is, and often that seems to be when we have the kind of time cost quality sort of triangle, that time is a really governing factor, and really drives kind of the decisions and the things that get done or don't get done on a project.
Yeah, and because that time, of course, what we want as a developer is to have a wind farm which is as cheap as possible, of course, standing there for the service life, and if possible a bit more. And there, how shall I? What we of course see is that the designer, and that the main duty of the designer is to deliver a design that will stand there for 20 plus years, let's say. And this indeed with a quite short timeline, because once we start with this detailed design, the planning to get to building it is quite framed or quite set. And there we see that the focus, the most energy goes into just get the job done and following the rules, following the codes, for having it certified. And we are often then still in discussing. We may still be because we are discovering stuff along the line. We would like to go to have better knowledge of this impact of the choice we make on the long term. And there, of course, the time plays a crucial role, of course.
Mm.
Yeah.
Go on, Nick.
I was going to say, I always found, kind of, certainly when I was at Ramble, that it was, I don't know how much kind of engineers enjoy the time aspect, shall we say. I always found kind of deadlines as a hindrance almost, and they kind of got in the way of the engineering I like to do. Maybe I was doing a really nice piece of FE or something, and I was kind of in the project to do the sums, and that's what I enjoyed. And I don't know, Carl, if you feel similarly.
Well, I think what you do find is that as part of the project life cycle, like obviously the overall schedule is there in the background, and I think we're usually fairly comfortable working to the overall schedule. But what you find is that there's a lot of intermediate milestones. And quite often, I know we're going to come on to capex and opex, but quite often early on in the project, there's a lot of focus on, say, getting some early indications of, say, foundation weight, for example, and an awful lot of focus goes into that, and sometimes almost at the expense of the kind of perhaps the longer term product development, where from a designer's perspective, and perhaps we're thinking, well, this time could perhaps be better spent developing the project rather than this focus, say, on deriving some very early initial weights, which obviously, I mean, obviously it's for Eric to comment on more than me, but I can only assume are used to, go out to market, start trying to understand product cost more and so on. And so I guess that where it gets back to where kind of engineers, perhaps from an engineering perspective, explicitly would want to, go away and refine their ideas a bit more. So that does certainly comes into play on a number of projects.
Interesting. And I think that there's also, when we were speaking earlier in the week, Carl, the word innovation started to crop up quite a lot.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a very interesting topic, because I think Eric actually mentioned previously that, he'd like the designer to be constantly innovating, coming forward with new ideas and stuff. And I think that's an interesting take, because I mean, every design effectively, there's no repeat design really. We're not like the car manufacturing industry, where we have a very kind of set environment that we operate in, and we're just developing a new car and trying to add new features to a car that always operates in the same environment. Our environment constantly changing. As designers, usually a new project has new environmental conditions to consider. Now, maybe the water's deeper, maybe it's in a new geography in the world, so we've got seismic, and more often than not, it's a much larger turbine again and again and again. So, things may seem a bit static, perhaps sometimes from some of the more secondary aspects of foundation design, but I mean, we're effectively constantly trying to innovate in trying to get kind of existing foundation types to work in more and more rigorous environments, to take more and more load, basically. So that's a constant focus. And as you said at the start, the schedule is usually very restricted on these projects. So all these things kind of tie the project down in terms of what you can do innovation wise. I mean, we would say, I'm sure we would say at Ramble, we're constantly trying to innovate, and I mean that's effectively a designer. We're in competition with other designers. That's our market edge almost. So you have to do that. But where the new ideas come from is.
But I think, Carl, there's also something to be said for the type of innovation that designers do. So I think, in my experience, the sort of innovation where you kind of improve your processes, or maybe automate something that was done manually previously, just to kind of bring your costs down. You spoke about your kind of commercial edge. If you can tender at a lower price because now we've automated this process, then that's obviously beneficial for Ramble, or the designer more generally. But it's not kind of lowering the cost of a foundation.
But isn't it interesting that that's even a consideration, that the cost that it's fun. I mean, it's almost odd to think that designers lose projects on their tender cost. If you look at the cost of whatever a designer would be charging for their detailed design work compared to the overall cost of a foundation or wind farm development, I think it always strikes designers as strange to a degree that we're losing on that the cost is really even that big of an issue, when surely you would suspect that the decisions we're making and the designs we're coming up with have a far greater impact on the overall cost of the project.
Okay.
Yeah. On that one about what we the detail design is obviously something which is occurring quite early in the project, and because of this lead time, we need to start it actually prior to that all financing stuff is gone. So that's what I call the expensive money. And that's okay. I'm too involved in the efforts you are making to see the added value, but the finance guys that doesn't really see the difficulties and the iterations. So maybe next to me we should also have a finance guy, but I can represent them. In terms of innovation, we are clearly looking. Our way of innovation is to get this design, this foundation cost down. Also in terms of O&M, to have a kind of how shall I say, that the structures delivered by the design, or the drawings, the structures are as possible maintenance free, and therefore we have indeed asked you to develop this box platform, which doesn't require any beam structure, just because of to make it much easier to code and to maintain. But of course, a new project, you need the whole supply, the supply line, also understanding this innovation, and what we often see is that even if the ID on the O&M part, and even on the capex part, should go down because of the innovative side. The first elements actually appear to be more expensive than expected. That's also something.
So I have a question for you all. Do you think that there's actually a bit of issue in the definition? So do you think across the sides of the table, what is meant by innovation is perhaps construed a little bit differently?
In my opinion, no. I think everyone sort of knows what they mean by innovation, but it's how to get that, how to realize it in practice, and how to get that into a project. Or maybe that's a problem. Often innovation is kind of shoehorned into a project where there are kind of financial constraints or time constraints. and maybe like within a project isn't the ideal time to be doing innovation. It's, there are too many external pressures to allow that to, the kind of blue sky thinking to occur. So I think maybe there's a bit of responsibility on both parties to try and bring innovation outside of a project and find budget for that from other sources.
Ooh, what do you make of that, folks?
It's the concepts of such innovation, you do it outside, but really if you want to go to the hardcore and to really to function, it's something you do along of a project. We have been looking in using other materials than steel for some aspects, and you can have the big ideas prior to, but really to test this and to test this, you need also the teams available to this, and you scramble the teams. At least it's how it works. Of PowerPoint, you scramble the teams when you have actually a project. Of course, there's a quite long development time where you can use this, but at the end, the proof is in eating the pudding, and then we need a project to do this.
Yeah.
Maybe some other developers may have a big R&D R&D department where they can do this, but for a rather small developer as PowerPoint, this is something you do along with a project.
Mm-hmm.
And but it can be done. We've done it to get to prototypes within a project in the contracts, and we've done it. Yeah.
Interesting. Thank you, Eric. Carl, anything else from your point of view on this one?
I mean, only that at Ramble, I'm sure we'd all, we'd love to be able to spend the time to, innovate even more ideas and approach developers and clients and say, we have these even more better improvements to bring to your project. I mean, we tried to do it already, obviously, but we're almost in we're in a similar or even tighter position than the developer, in such that we are effectively financed by our projects. So we haven't got essentially the resources to go outside of our projects to focus on these areas of development, unless we we really strongly feel we have to bring that to market. So that's where we're a designer. We're quite constrained.
I think when we were talking the other day as well, you mentioned that a lot of the focus is on getting the capital costs down rather than O&M costs, and perhaps maybe that balance isn't quite right.
Certainly. Well, I mean, I only, again, can I obviously only speak for the designer, but where we sit is that there's the pressure is always on. I mean, I think even I saw a question from Carl in the chat there. Is should we be motivated to innovate to reduce weight and cost? I mean, weight and cost. They're essentially the two are the same. But I mean, I think that there's perhaps. I mean, you could say there's almost too much focus on that, because as engineers, we're always, I mean, it's not like we set out to be inefficient and then we're told by a developer or client, please go away and reduce the weight. No, we're trying to do that already. And the focus is almost so much on that, to the extent of anything else, that that it kind of almost drowns out or suffocates the possibility to look at innovation in other areas. Because especially when you're thinking of innovation, perhaps in the areas like Eric's talking about, rather in platform development, say, initially explorations into the area, it may not be and even a weight saving area. It might be like we were saying, an OPEX saving, but that can only really be fully understood and realized by the developer. So it's almost as, I guess both parties have to come to the table with how they approach that, but it certainly has to be an approach from everyone on the project, rather than what you often find is a very strong focus on weight reduction at the start of a project.
Yeah, I think, I mean, I can kind of see why CapEx is kind of, it's much easier to target, should we say. You know, you can almost quantify it in terms of weight or weld lengths, or, you know, it's much more numerical. Whereas to get feedback on kind of ways of improving, you know, maintainability or that aspect out in the field, you know, there's a long chain of getting feedback from, you know, the people going out to the foundations, and then, you know, they need a certain amount of time in the field before problems start occurring. But, you know, maybe you need 5 years or 10 years before things actually start failing, and then for that to feed back, you know, to the owner, to the developer, to the designer, and then to actually kind of manifest in an improvement on design is, you know, you can see the kind of the chain and the, you know, the amount of points where the information can get lost is. You can see why OpEx modifications or improvements are so hard to come by.
Absolutely. I think that's really interesting points, and we are heading straight in at full speed into the next section, which was to discuss the balance between CapEx and OpEx. And I can also see in the chat on the side that there's some few good points as well. So Scott Love, you're going to really enjoy this next bit. We've got a poll specially for you coming up as well. So here we go. So in terms of that balance between CapEx and OpEx, we've already touched a little bit. I mean, you know, Nick, sort of set the scene. Where do you think it kind of lies at the moment?
In terms of the balance between CapEx and OpEx on a project, I don't think I'm allowed sight of the sums, the euros behind the scenes. But yeah, I mean, I think as the discussion here has pointed out, it seems very heavily weighted on how do we save money now, rather than, you know, how we save money, you know, throughout the project life cycle.
Eric, what's your view?
Yeah, the OpEx is definitely considered when we make our business models on the wind farms. But my focus, or as a foundation package manager, my focus lays indeed on the steel, on the foundations, less on the VHG part. And most of the OpEx money is going to the VTG part to get these turbines up and running. The part of the O&M part for the foundation is much lower than for the turbines. However, we try to reduce this, and we by having this discussion, I was, so sometimes my mind is is little shifting there to see if we are not pushing too much now on, for my part, for the foundation, to see whether for the moment we just said we need to go to maintenance down, and therefore we need to have this maintenance out by having this kind of innovations. We were talking about this platform with ready to innovate, but maybe we should do maybe another internal exercise to see whether we can allow for more maintenance on my part. Once it's operational, of course, then you have a revenue, and you can use this, of course.
Yeah.
But for the moment, it's indeed there is one clear view. If we can avoid getting people out there, then we should do so. Yeah.
Excellent. I think that insight is really, really interesting. I think we should ask the audience. I think we've got a bit of debate going down the side. So why don't we ask the audience? So if you look at the bottom, we're just about to switch on a second poll now. And the question that we're going to ask you all is, if you dig down below, do you believe there's too much focus on capex, too much on opex, or do we think the balance is about right? I think that's Eric. Is that Eric's phone in the background? So come on then. What do we think, Scott? I hope you're putting your vote in. So the votes are being cast, and it will come as no surprise that at the moment, 80% of the votes say there's too much focus on capex. Thank you, Scott. Pleased to hear it.
I guess the only problem with that finding, is that kind of everyone has a like we were saying before, everyone has a good understanding of the capex side of things, and so it may feel, effectively we don't know enough to answer this question, because perhaps there is the right amount of focus on capex. If the opex costs are less than the capex, then we would be doing the right thing. Sure. But the problem is we just don't know, or it feels like, at least, say at a project outset, we just don't know where the balance should lie. And maybe that is yes, okay, there are wind farms now coming to end of life, but they're kind of few and far between, and design has moved on a lot. So I'm not sure how much you can draw from the experiences of the very first wind farms in terms of what O&M would look like on a modern day wind farm. Yeah. But still, I think there's clearly a lot to be gained from perhaps developers, I guess, especially. But I know it's an area that designers are getting into as well, to kind of aid that, is to look over the operating models for the farms, look over how the farms have weathered effectively out there for 5-10 years, etc., and see what improvements can be made, and perhaps in the future the focus will move more towards perhaps what we'd consider more of a balanced approach between capex and opex development criteria, so that it won't be all just on pure weight savings. I'm sure that will still be there, but there'll be other. The thing is you can't. It has to be kind of like smart deliverables. There has to be some kind of scope to it, some kind of measured improvement you can make to certain criteria of the design that will lead to a kind of a net benefit to O&M costs in the future, whatever that might be. But
okay, I think, well, that is very interesting. I'm also conscious of time. There's a couple of other things I want to ask you both during today, so I think I might move on to the next section. Speakers, do have a little look at the questions as we go. There's quite a few have come in if you want to pick any others up. But the next thing I was going to ask you all, which actually feeds in really well from what Carl just said, is, if we're going to improve, we need to communicate well. Do we feel that the feedback loop between the developer and the designer and vice versa is sufficiently robust to enable us to improve in the ways that we want to? Nick, that's a nice easy question. I think I'll start with you.
So short and simply, no. I don't think the feedback loop is robust enough. I think often, the designer is contracted for a project, and once they hand in that final report or those final drawings, the relationship is almost severed, and there's no very little or very little feedback on how the installation campaign went, how the first few months of operation are going, what works well, what isn't working quite so well. And I think there's a whole lot to be a whole lot of benefit to be had on both sides if that relationship is kind of maintained, and that feedback is happening. I remember kind of within my first week of working at Parkwind, I saw some videos, I think, of a cable pulling operation, and I just it kind of blew my mind almost, that I'd never really thought about how kind of messy the situation is on with all the tools and all the equipment and all the people. When you're a designer, you have your your 3D CAD model, and it's crisp and clean, and it's almost perfect. And to see someone actually interacting with this, and all the health and safety elements, and all the even just where they're hanging their jackets, or they probably don't do that, but that kind of thing, that the human aspect was kind of really opened my eyes to this kind of whole world of things that are quite hard to quantify. You can't write down all that. There must be a a little peg here for someone to hang his hammer on or something. But it's just getting a feel for the real world operation, and I think that's completely absent, I'll say, in the relationship between the developer and the designer.
So where is the feedback? Oh, did everyone get it?
I think you said where is the feedback? So to keep on talking, I think the way it happens now is it's quite dry. It seems to be the developer has a kind of lessons learned session, internally, and they write down the things that worked and they didn't, and then that kind of ends up going into the employer's requirements or some sort of interface document. It's all this kind of real world colorful experience is sort of distilled to this very dry requirement on a piece of paper, on page 940 of a PDF or something. And I don't know if that's an effective way of communicating it.
Yeah. So as Parkwind, we are indeed also operating our wind farms, and we have teams going out there on a daily basis, and we indeed capture this feedback. And the way we do it is indeed to include it in employees' requirement and towards the designer. Indeed, that's the way it goes. Of course, we are sending this message. How it's received with the designer. Maybe I should ask Carl to. Of course, when we do this, there are a lot of images, movies, as you say, or just experience we have, which included in these sentences, designers, sentences and requirements. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think Nick's right to a degree. We'd always certainly benefit from more visibility and knowing more. I mean, there's no harm in knowing more. I think at Ramble there's, and I suspect at all designers, there's a kind of great emphasis on trying to build client relationships because there's value in doing that over time. Obviously I've been lucky enough to work with Eric on or Parkwind generally, and of course a couple of projects now, and certainly you do build relationships. You do get a better understanding. Not every developer is the same. Not every client's the same. Do have certain individual kind of goals or wants, whatever, that help you help you develop, I guess, a better design for those particular developers. I think that's why that kind of feedback loop is obviously very beneficial, because you see people like Ørsted who can do it all internally, and there must, I mean, and hence I would surmise that's why they're successful, because they're allowed, they can keep everything in house, they can recycle everything from project to project, so they can, in the most efficient way possible, they can build on their previous experience. Clearly, when parties are separate, when there's different developers, different designers, and other third parties involved, it is more difficult to share that information. And I mean, you're right, Nick, it is difficult to distill kind of wants and needs down into a scope document and so on. But I'm not sure if there's a better solution to that, but it's effectively what you need to do if you're trying to contract between third parties. So that's where it comes down to.
Do you think, Carl, there should be more responsibility on the designer to get some offshore experience, to get people trained and on installation vessels, or on just on foundations themselves?
I mean, I think you could do that. You could take that approach, but that's similar to the approach of saying the designer should also go away and develop new solutions as well and bring them to the table. I mean, Ramble or any designer could go away and do all of that, but imagine the cost involved in doing that. And yet earlier we spoke that the designer is not really recognised for bringing, or is not often recognised, or doesn't seemingly be often recognised for bringing kind of these extras to the table. Our proposals or our replies to tenders are still effectively based on some quite strict defined scope and a price. So from a designer's perspective, we feel perhaps we don't feel we have that ability to explore those areas perhaps as much as we even like to, because we're restricted in terms of what's available for us. I think developers are perhaps, eventually they're the ones investing in the long term, so to speak, right? So I think that's, again, going back to Ørsted, that's why they do what they do, because they're designing something for themselves that they're going to use the next 25, 30 odd years. So they obviously definitely see the value in that kind of recycling of knowledge.
But as Parkwind, we somehow are in the same in the same model. We are also operating and maintaining our wind farms. And when we start a new one, we just let's do the same. But we have different environmental conditions, and obviously the turbines are changing, and the loads are changing. So, and somehow our minds are changing also. So it's also good to as a developer I think we're keen in innovating and getting new ideas tested in our designs to where we believe we have a clear advantage. So it's a look back on what we're talking about. So this is clearly also our goal, but also people change in the design in the design teams. And as a designer, either we always work with the same designer, but there were also we want to competition play and give a chance to other designers. So you have all these variables which you account for, where at the end you don't have the same product. Even the intention is to globally have a same product and recycle what you've done before. But I must admit that we have built a few wind farms now, and they are all different. I must say for all these reasons.
I think an interesting parallel is if you look at the, I think it's the Dutch offshore wind tenders, where they're effectively zero subsidy, and so price effectively is no longer a concern. And so I think the Dutch government were like, well, bring your other ideas to us. And I can't remember, there's different projects and different people have won them now. But I've certainly read stories of people like Shell and Vattenfall and others turning up with lots of add-ons and effectively what you would say is innovation, because suddenly that cost driver is no longer a primary driver anymore. And I think it would certainly be, I don't doubt this will ever happen, but it would certainly be an interesting project if a developer came along and said, right, instead of designers, instead of approaching us on price, let's say that the price is irrelevant. Just give us your, absolute, your best ideas, your
Lamborghini.
Yeah, we want the Lamborghini of offshore wind farms. What can you offer us? That would certainly be an interesting project to be involved in.
Excellent.
I must admit, I didn't catch really was the interest of the developer in this one.
Well, because I guess for you as well. Okay, the Lamborghini. Essentially because the designer and the developer are still trying to achieve the same thing at the end of the day. We still want to effectively offer the best wind farm out there. We're not just putting bells and whistles on there for the sake of them being there. We're still, it would obviously would have to be constrained to a degree. But if we said, what's the best that can be offered, like you said, to get the absolute maintenance, the most maintenance-free offshore wind farm, if that was your only goal and price was completely secondary, then you might end up with quite a different tender process, quite a different design development process.
Yeah. So not indeed. How we function is to set a kind of task. Actually, what the design is about is a certain number of tasks you have to execute if it's bluntly speaking, and the price for it, then maybe this partnership and talking along and to maybe having a bigger challenge from our requirements to go back is probably a way to go. That need to see how it functions commercially, because that's all at the end of the day. That this is also playing into account, but having more this this sparring partner that are really just the designer may add value to the process.
Excellent. That's really interesting. We are very much over on time on this one, so I'd just like to ask you all, in terms of that sort of working better together, any sort of final thoughts from anyone about how things could be a little bit improved in the future? What would you like to see? Nick, start with you.
Yeah, for me, I think we've kind of touched on the main aspects that I think we can work together. I think the first one is kind of feedback, getting that feedback from the offshore operations back to the designer, and then secondly, allowing that kind of relationship to develop, where the experience from one project kind of feeds into the next, and the teams get to know each other. I think that's crucial to getting a good solution, a good foundation.
I think that's a really fair and clear point. Thank you, Nick. Who'd like to go next? Any sort of final thoughts about how we can maybe work a little bit better together?
I think I would just say, like, building on what Nick said, I certainly see value in that. I think it's interesting actually, because Eric brought on the point that, from a developer's perspective, it's also nice to have competition in the market from the designer's perspective. But that almost does the opposite of what you're trying to achieve, which is develop ongoing relationships. So I feel that a designer's, because it is a competitive marketplace, we're all trying to do as much as we can to effectively win the next project. And so I feel, to agree, we're quite developer-led in that. So at the moment, depending on the project, that can be quite cost-orientated. But if developers were to push more towards, kind of other metrics of measurement, perhaps, then there would be a response from the market to meet that. But I certainly, like I said before, certainly at Ramble, I think we did see the benefit in repeatedly working with Parkwind. We were able to, over time, you do, just generally as people develop better relationships, you get a better understanding of each other, and that must result in better outcomes in projects.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. Okay, go for it. Yes.
Something to add. Even I believe in a competitive market, and because of you have been normal tender process, and then you shouldn't. I believe that the name we are giving to you is designer consultant, and maybe this consultancy part, which being just challenging and getting a bit more in this discussion on the choices we are making, and challenge us in terms of this discussion is something you as a designer, we of course as developer, you have to accept this, and that depends on the people you have around the table. But that's also something that can be tested without knowing upfront that okay, Parkwind has a new project, Rumble will do it, to speak bluntly.
Excellent. Well, I think we should probably call time on this one today. I would like to say thank you very much indeed to all of our speakers who've given up their morning for the chat. I think it's been a really, really good debate, and hopefully made a few minds think out there in the audience. I'd also like to thank again our sponsors for helping make this possible. I would definitely not like to thank my internet service provider for booting me out for a couple of minutes midstream, so sorry about that, everyone. Keep a lookout on email and on the Empire Engineering website and our LinkedIn page for the next session. We'll aim to do the next one towards the end of November. We'll have information on the topic and who's involved over the next couple of weeks. If any of you from today would like to speak with Nick or any of the team at Empire, you can see the contact details on the screen now. But for now, I really just wanted to say thank you very, very much. Yeah, as Carl says, to the presenters and the crowd, and look forward to chatting with you all again next month. Thank you very much. That's it for today. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.